You hear it all the time, right? Corporations are constantly talking about changing their culture. They want to be more inclusive, more innovative, more everything. But how much of that is genuine? Today, we are pulling back the curtain on why companies really change, and let me tell you, the truth is often a lot more about pressure than it is about principle.
So let's just cut right to the chase with the big question that frames this entire explainer. Do companies change because they have some kind of moral awakening, or are they literally forced into it? Honestly, getting to the bottom of this is the key to understanding, well, everything that's coming next.
And the guy who's going to help us unpack all this is Santiago Duran. Now, he's got a really unique perspective. He's a clinical psychologist and a marketing scientist who spent years on the inside of massive global corporations. So his analysis gives us this incredible lens to see past all the slick press releases and into the real, sometimes messy, mechanics of change.
All right, so let's dive into the core of what Duran is arguing. He basically suggests that whenever a company announces one of these huge cultural shifts, the real motivations are usually hidden. And surprise, surprise, they're not always as noble as they might seem on the surface.
Duran breaks it all down into three pretty distinct drivers. He calls them the three faces of corporate change. It's simple, really. A company is either forced to change, it changes just to survive, or, and this is the rarest one of all, it changes from the soul. So let's take a closer look at each of these, right? Force, survival, and soul. Getting the difference between them is absolutely crucial because it helps us see that thin line between what's genuine progress and what's just a really, really good PR campaign.
First up, we've got change by force. This is 100% reactive. It's a direct response when outside pressure, like, say, a massive social movement or a new law, gets too big to ignore. A perfect example? Think about Amazon. After facing this huge global backlash over its warehouse working conditions, the company suddenly added new leadership principles. Duran would argue this wasn't really a moment of enlightenment, it was damage control, plain and simple.
Next on the list is change for survival. Now, this isn't about social pressure, it's about market pressure. It's about staying in the game. I mean, think about it. When the pandemic hit, companies didn't suddenly fall in love with remote work. No way. They rolled out hybrid models because they had to. To keep the lights on and stop all their talent from walking out the door. It was a strategic move, not a moral one. And finally, we have the unicorn, the rarest of them all, change from the soul. This is what happens when a company actually looks inward and decides to fundamentally change who it is and what it values, without being pushed by some crisis. The textbook example here is Microsoft under Satya Nadella. He took this combative, know-it-all culture and shifted it to a collaborative, learn-it-all culture. That was driven from the inside, by a real vision for a better way to innovate.
Okay, so now that we have this framework, let's apply it to one of the most powerful, undeniable examples of change by force in modern history, the MeToo movement. This wasn't just some hashtag that trended for a week. It was a seismic event that forced a massive, and I mean massive reckoning inside the corporate world.
Just look at this timeline. Before 2017, DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, was a pretty quiet corner in most HR departments. Then boom, hashtag MeToo goes viral. A few years later, in 2020, the powerful calls for racial justice erupt. The corporate response? It was immediate and it was huge. By 2023, having a dedicated DEI department wasn't just a nice to have, it was standard practice in the Fortune 500.
And the scale of this reaction is just staggering. Between 2018 and 2021 alone, the number of jobs in diversity and inclusion shot up by 68%. This wasn't some gradual, thoughtful evolution. As Duran sees it, this was companies hitting the panic button.
And this quote from Duran just nails it. He calls the whole thing an involuntary corporate mea culpa dressed as progress. Think about that. In other words, it's a forced apology that's been packaged to look like a voluntary step forward. It's a really powerful critique that makes you question the real motive behind all these initiatives.
And here's where you see the huge disconnect. On one hand, you've got over 80% of companies launching these big DEI programs, but the view from the inside? Totally different. Survey after survey shows that less than half of employees actually feel these programs have made any real difference. According to Duran, this gap exists because forced changes, well, they tend to focus on optics and protecting the company from lawsuits, not on fixing the deep-seated cultural problems.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Is all of this frenzied activity actually leading to real, meaningful progress? Or is it all just a performance for a very, very critical audience?
And this is where that term performative allyship becomes so important. You've probably heard it. It's the act of talking the talk. You know, posting the black square on Instagram, making big public statements, but without actually walking the walk, without making the hard, deep, structural changes needed to actually fix the problems.
And this leads us right to what Duran calls the great corporate paradox. On the left side, you've got the public promise. We champion values, inclusivity, transparency. But on the right, you've got the operational reality, which is so often still driven by one thing: profit. And that can end up perpetuating the exact inequities these programs claim they want to solve. So, what's the big takeaway here? Duran concludes that maybe, just maybe, we're all focusing on the wrong thing. Instead of asking why a company changed, whether it was by force, for survival, or from the soul, maybe the only question we should be asking is, what was the actual outcome? Did it create real, lasting, positive change for its people?
And that leaves us with one last, critical question to chew on. When we see a corporation announce some massive cultural shift, are we actually witnessing a revolution in how business is done? Or are we just watching a predictable and maybe even temporary reaction? The answer to that question is going to define the future of the modern workplace.